My name is Jonathan Williamson. I know many of you, but not all, so please accept my welcome to campus if you're from off campus and to this event this evening. I'm particularly struck by the date that we have. Of course, we're on election day where we're deciding many, many important things on a local, state, and national level. And particularly I'm struck by, all the ads that we see, all of the parts that have become part of contemporary campaigning in the United States. And the contrast that we've tried to create as part of our energy speaker series here in the center, where it's been very important for us to focus on creating civil discourse around topics of energy. Of course, we have lots of important questions to ask, to think about, to debate and to argue about, and to find solutions to provide reliable, affordable, and sustainable forms of energy for the current generations and for many future generations to come. The only way, in my personal opinion, and as part of the mission of the center, to do that is to do it through civil discourse. We can disagree and we can advocate for our perspective vigorously, but we can always learn something even from those with which we disagree. And so I think it is fitting then that we have a speaker, a pair of speakers this evening on election night where we're all awaiting to see what the last couple of years have meant for our Commonwealth and our country, where we demonstrate that model of thinking and of discussing and of learning through civil discourse, and tonight, of course, doing it around energy. And so I want to introduce our two speakers and then let them help to launch our discussion. First, we'll be hearing from Senator Dave Argyll, class of 1980 from Lycoming College. And so we welcome him back to campus as a good friend of the college. Senator Argyll represents the 29th Senatorial District in Harrisburg. That includes municipalities, 94 municipalities, as I'm told, in Schuylkill and Berks County. He's the majority policy chairman for the Republican Party in the Senate, and in that responsibility, I think, has known and developed a reputation as one of the thinkers helping to identify and try to solve problems in Harrisburg. He received his bachelor's degree from Lycoming College and went on to earn his doctorate in public administration, including in that capacity then serving as an instructor here at Lycoming College, where he's taught Pennsylvania politics to our students at least twice over the years. So please join me in welcoming Senator Argyll. And so I can stop talking. Let me also introduce Bob Bucknam, Lycoming College class of 81. I hear tell we may hear some stories about their shared time on campus, including one maybe related to this picture. At least I'm hoping for it. Mr. Bucknam is a partner at Archer Attorneys at Law. He has extensive experience in the law related to land use, environmental permitting, regulatory compliance. He co-chairs his firm's Energy and Utilities Group, and in his practice specializes in planning, zoning, environmental law, permitting, energy law, amongst other areas, but those particular areas of expertise meant he's been a great asset and friend of the college and friend to the center, including coming to speak to my class last semester on the politics of energy. And I think the students, I see a few of them, by the way, from that class really learned a lot. And I also understand that students in the science of energy class today, Dr. Mahlers, I saw him come in, there he is, learned a lot from Senator Argyll. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Bucknam to campus, back to campus. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to the Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was originally going to show you the picture from my wedding. Bob was in my wedding, and then I found this in the 1980 yearbook, and so I thought this is much more appropriate. But yeah, it's always good to be back, and especially good to be back with my friend Bob Bucknam. He was definitely one of the very best friends that I made here, and coming here, I've told my folks, was probably one of the best decisions that I ever made throughout the entire life. So it's certainly great when Bob and I get together, which isn't often. It's just amazing how the decades just kind of melt away, as if we were back at the student assembly table up at the, spent a lot of time on the second floor, the top floor of the Wirtz Student Center. We also solved a lot of the problems at the Brandon Cafe, but we're not going to go there. I don't pretend to remember everything from my 4 years here, but I do recall that in D001, over in the Academic Center, at our freshman orientation, then President Bloomer, in his first speech to the freshman class, told us that the mark of a truly educated individual was the understanding of how much we did not know. And so I have never forgotten that. And I think tonight, during the Q&A, you'll probably find out how much I do not know about the politics of energy. I've told Jonathan I am not an energy expert, but I'm promised to do my best. We'll begin with one of my favorite, when I teach, laws of the public policy and Miles's law: where you stand depends on where you sit. And so this is simple common sense. And to the students in the class, if you remember nothing else from my presentation, remember this. This will serve you well. So where do I sit regarding energy? This is just a couple of miles from my house. This is an active anthracite coal mining operation outside of Monoy City in Schuylkill County, about an hour and a half southeast of here. This is, of course, an active strip mining operation, as is this, just to give you a scope of what some of these places look like after 250 years of anthracite mining. This is my old neighborhood. Let's see. This is Tamakwa. This is the last street in town, and so middle of that block would be the house that I left to come to Lycoming, and if you walked about a couple of hundred yards out my backyard, that would be an abandoned strip mine area. These are still active areas here. And so obviously when you're talking energy to someone like me, this is the first thing that comes to mind. I spent a lot of time there. Attorney Bucknam would tell you that I know much more about this property than I have a legal right to know, all right? And one of the things, probably every kid in my neighborhood, the same thing. We spent a lot of time crawling around those areas, despite the fact that our mothers told us not to. I blame it on the fact that video games had not yet been invented, and so we had some time on our hands. And I only found later that when I thought I was crawling around old abandoned strip mines, they were actually deep mines that had collapsed. So I told you that coming to Lycoming was probably one of the smartest things I ever did. Crawling around those old deep mines after they'd collapsed was probably one of the stupidest. The key question then is, well, why were there so many mines that, there we go. Why were there so many mines behind the house? This is the house that I left, still there. Interesting to me, these are the newer houses in Tamakwa. Why did Tamakwa stop growing in 1917? Because that was the year that anthracite coal mining hit its production. We are now at about 2% of the production of 1917. And so you think about the fact that gradually, painfully, throughout the Depression years that followed, mine after mine began to close. This is my great-grandfather, and this is his pink slip. Notice it's really pink. Who knew, right? But tens of thousands of individuals like great-grandpa received these in the coal regions in the 1930s. Here we see colliery suspended, position abolished. He was a fire boss, which meant he dealt with dynamite. In 1932, he never worked again. And there were tens of thousands of these notices that went out. My father remembered that in the 1940s, even though the mines were closed, there were still bootleg operations. During the Depression, people needed to eat. They knew how to mine coal. And so many years after I'd graduated from Lycoming, he told the story about how when he and his younger brother stole some dynamite from one of these bootleg miners to build a swimming hole, and how quickly the bootlegger ran away as he and Uncle Claire were putting the wires together. At that point, I thought, all right, I'm not the only dumb one who was doing crazy things around the coal mines. And I suspect I know why my father didn't tell me that story until I was like 40 or 50. And so after World War II, the pace of mine closings began to escalate. And while I told you that this year marks the 250th anniversary of anthracite coal mining in Pennsylvania, here you see all of the purple is the anthracite area, Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Pottsville, Tamakwa. We now have barely 1,000 employees. It used to be 200,000. And so if you can imagine when Dad graduated from Tamakwa High, 27% documented unemployment. 1 out of every 4 people looking for jobs in northeastern Pennsylvania couldn't find them. So what does that kind of, what does 27% unemployment, it devastates your communities. These are recent shots from the town of Girardville in northern Schuylkill County. Here we have Shenandoah. Here we have Mahanoy City. I did not have to go far to find these pictures, unfortunately. And look at the data. Tamakwa, my old town, lost 45% of its population between 1930 and 2010. Shenandoah lost 77%. It's just amazing. Town after town after town. Scranton, lost almost 70,000 people. And so you can imagine how much that hurts in a community. And so what does that lead to? It leads to outmigration. It leads to abandonment. It leads to some really nasty job statistics. And so the question that you should be asking by now is, well, what does that have to do with regulating Pennsylvania's future energy portfolio? And so here's the answer from Dr. Larson, Dr. Piper, and Dr. Morris, the history department, when I was here. Some of you know these characters. And what they stressed to us again and again and again was that you really can learn a lot from history. And I learned a lot from them. The first textbook that I used when I began my teaching here and at Penn State on Pennsylvania's political history explained Pennsylvania's intertwined energy and economic and political history this way, looking at the year 1900. I've got a short excerpt. The state surpassed all other states in mineral wealth and would maintain its lead until 1935. Pennsylvania Railroad was the nation's most famous. State ranked first in shipbuilding, poured 60% of the steel in the country, it produced half of the nation's natural gas. The petroleum industry started north of Pittsburgh, and 3 out of 5 of America's coal miners lived in Pennsylvania. You all know that energy and economic monopoly did not last, and when those major industries began their long decline, that precipitated major political challenges all across Pennsylvania. Another one of my favorite texts. I saw a lot of these on your shelf in your office today. There you go. Here's the energy highlight of their chapter on Pennsylvania. Again, I'll quote, after World War II, both home heating and industry switched away from coal. Result has been the slowest population growth of any major state. Pennsylvania had 30 House members, as many as California, and more than Texas in 1960. Now we have 18, California has 53, and Texas has 36. But again, the almanac also notes that businesses and technology came to our rescue, and Pennsylvania became an energy leader once again. Again, I'll quote, rural Pennsylvania, once the site of America's first oil well and first commercial nuclear power plant, is becoming a major energy producer for America again. The Marcellus Shale underneath 60% of Pennsylvania contains the nation's largest reserves of natural gas embedded in hard rock. With the development of horizontal drilling, fracking became commercially feasible in 2004, and there are now wells throughout much of northern and western Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania imported 75% of our natural gas in 2007. 5 years later, we were exporting it. The new fee that was passed, the impact fee, has generated $200 million per year in state revenue and 234,000 jobs. And then they note, many counties in northern Pennsylvania that had been languishing for years are suddenly crackling with activity. And from everything that I've heard, Lycoming County is one of those counties. So that's the world that we live in today, the world that we inherited from yesterday, as my history professors would have noted. We've inherited it, the good, the bad, and the truly ugly. So, what are the choices that we face today at the country? Well, guess what? They're directly related to the choices that we've made in the past. And so again, to quote Miles's law, where do we stand? Where do we sit? Again, here we have the anthracite coal region. I represent the lowest county in that belt. About 250,000 people that each senator, such as Senator Yaw and I, represent. So that would be the northern two-thirds of my district. And here is a recent press release, just to give you an idea that the loss of coal jobs, it's not just something from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. It's a continuing today. Here we have the loss of 25 more jobs in a power plant just north of Hazleton that sits right off of Route 81. Here's a historic artifact. I was there as a very young state representative the day it opened, okay? Never expected that I would be there for its opening as well as its closing. And so while my good friend and fellow alum, Senator Yaw, is fortunate to represent a district where the natural gas industry has created a large number of new jobs for me or John Gordner down in Berwick or Senator Blake from Scranton or Senator Udechak from Nanticoke, the questions that we usually get asked back home are, how can we work with the few remaining coal companies to try to hold on to the jobs that are still left? How do we work with the DEP to try to repair the many damages from the past? And let's talk about some of these damages. Any of you who have ever visited Schuylkill County or Luzerne County or Lackawanna County, probably not surprised to see orange streams. Again, 250 years of anthracite mining. This is a view that many of my constituents see when they look out their windows every day. Our first real environmental protection laws in Pennsylvania didn't begin until the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s. And so by that point, a lot of our landscape had been devastated. And again, it's not unusual to see polluted orange rivers and mountains of black muck. Here's another one just outside of Gerardville. When the Secretary of DEP testified in the 1990s in front of one of my committees, he told us at that time that we were closer in time to the Declaration of Independence than we were to the end of our acid mine issue. And so not the kind of comment that I want to be able to try to explain to my voters back home. The good news is, however, it's not all gloom and doom. We have made some amazing progress. This is a stream just outside of Tamakwa, the Little Schuylkill. When we kicked a ball in that river when I was in the 5th grade at Pine Street Elementary, we were not allowed to go after it because we would have come out orange and black. Today, fish thrive there, and so it's something that we're very proud of. At one celebration of an unborn stream, of a reborn stream, I asked a guy who knew my grandfather back in the 1920s what Pop Argyll would have said if I would have predicted as a young child that someday there'd be fish in that creek. And his answer to me was, your grandpa would have thought you'd had way too much to drink, Sonny. All right, and so we have made some progress. This is right outside the town of Coaldale, and here is a coal mine that was recently reclaimed. This mountain is now turning green for the first time in 100 years. I don't know that I ever thought that I would live to see it, but it's happening. And so the key for understanding Pennsylvania's energy future is this. I'm sure Dr. Williamson has used some charts like this. You probably have seen some of these in 6th grade or 7th grade or 8th grade civics. In order to pass a bill to turn it into a law in Harrisburg, 102 out of 203 votes in the House, 26 out of 50 in the Senate, and then there's that support of the governor. And if you remember again Miles's law, you're going to think about the diversity of the state. And so in the Marcellus Shale region, when we're talking energy policy, well, those representatives and those senators are going to say, what does this policy do to environmental protection in our region, and how can we utilize these amazing quantities of natural gas that no one predicted when I was a student here. In Western Pennsylvania, of course, these legislators are going to say, yeah, okay, Marcellus Shale is important, but we also have bituminous coal. And they've got their production levels of bituminous, the soft coal. This is 25 times larger than the anthracite that I'm used to. And so they too have found it very difficult to compete with major quantities of low-cost natural gas. And so that industry has also been in pretty serious decline. Then, of course, our colleagues who live next to our nuclear facilities are very focused about their future. And you probably have seen the fact that with TMI closing in 2019, with Beaver Valley closing out in Western Pennsylvania, they're talking about the loss of over 1,000 good-paying jobs. And so legislation has been introduced to try to help those plants. Very controversial, but nonetheless, for those representatives, you can understand why they're concerned about the future of these facilities. Then we get to Southeastern Pennsylvania, the home to a large number of Pennsylvania residents. And down in this part of the state, no coal, no oil, no gas, but pipelines. And they are very concerned about pipeline safety. And just in the last 2 years, over 50 bills have been introduced to address this issue, ranging from additional protections for water and natural resources, notification requirements for neighboring properties. Some of the bills introduced by my colleagues who have a major pipeline running through their district are very concerned about the health and safety impact. And so, in each part of the state, you're going to have different interests. Other legislators, too, depending on their own interests or their constituencies, may be more focused on wind and solar and other renewable sources. In 2004, the state enacted Act 213, which established the alternative energy portfolio standards that require electric generator suppliers to source 18% of their electricity from alternative sources by 2020. With a minimum of 0.5% from solar. There were, I think, over 100 bills introduced this session dealing just with alternative energy. How much should the state buy? What should our state buildings be heated with? Should there be loan programs and small grant programs for farms and other businesses to convert to renewable energy? And so somehow, some way, despite all of the conflicting interests, north versus south, east versus west, gas-producing areas be slated against non-producing areas, the need for jobs, the needs for environmental protection. We need to find a way forward. And my prediction is, of course, it's not going to be easy. I'll make another prediction. Senator Yaw and I and our colleagues and smart lawyers like Bob Bucknam are not going to solve all of these issues. Some of them may not even have a solution. This is one that I came across in my 13 long years of grad school, and this is actually in the opening pages of my doctoral dissertation, in discussing wicked problems, those problems with multiple conflicting definitions and no clear solutions, and whose necessarily imperfect solutions beget, there's a word I don't use very often, beget further problems. But somehow we need to find a way to deal with these wicked issues. For those of you who have Dr. Williamson, he's told me you use this in your next paper, guaranteed extra points, right? So there you go. We could just make sure you get the attribution correctly, okay? There, yeah, there you go. And so because we're not going to be humanly able to solve all of these issues, that means that some of these problems are going to be left to the students in the audience. Perhaps there's a science major who will find a better way to clean up some of those orange creeks. Perhaps there's a math major who will find a more efficient way to move our huge quantities of natural gas to markets. And you knew I had to mention this because I'm from Schuylkill County. Maybe there's a business major who, like my friend and former Lycoming student Dick Yingling, you'll find a way to, rather than rebuild a 1829 brewery, you'll find a way to promote wind and solar and make a whole lot more money than this public servant or even Mr. Yingling. And since he's probably one of the most successful business leaders in the country, I'd say that would be a really good target for any business student. And so the choice is up to you. My advice is based on my experience to take your studies seriously. The professors were very helpful to me. I've said in the class that I taught today that the best thing I did was listen to my advisors and get those internships, get those job service shadowing experiences to get you beyond the classroom. And so on energy, I probably know a whole lot more than I did that night in D001, but I still understand that there is a lot that I do not know, but I'm looking forward to hearing many more good things about Lycoming students and alum in the years to come. And I especially thank Jonathan for getting the Argyll and Bucknam team back together again for an academic purpose for the first time in 38 years.
Thank you. Very nice.
I don't know how to turn it off. I'll let you.
As you can see, I do not have a slide presentation. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Dave. Unlike Senator Argyll, who as a lifelong resident of Pennsylvania can tell you stories about the history of energy in the Commonwealth, many of which he heard firsthand from his grandfather and saw himself as a young child, I did not have the privilege of having that exposure. I did have the privilege of spending time at Lycoming College with Dave, as you've heard, during which I often heard his stories about the anthracite or hard coal industry that was so near and dear to his heart. Dave helped me to learn the difference between hard coal and soft coal, or bituminous coal, and what they each were used for in Pennsylvania. By the way, I learned that bituminous coal is found primarily in the western and central areas of Pennsylvania, while anthracite coal is found in the northeastern area of the Commonwealth, those locations you saw from Dave's presentation. I also learned that Pennsylvania is the last remaining state producing anthracite coal, which has a higher heat value than other kinds of coal, and that about 75% of the coal mined in Pennsylvania is used to generate electricity, with the remainder being used in steel making and heating. At that time, I really didn't know the significance of that trivia and that information, other than to learn a little bit about where Dave grew up and wonder why a college kid was so crazy about talking about coal and so happy about talking about coal and excited about it. But since then, I've ended up enjoying learning a great deal about the Pennsylvania energy and utility industry through my practice of law, and more specifically in representing clients in those areas during the course of the last many years. As my friend Dave can tell you with firsthand examples, like a lot of other states in the country as a whole, Pennsylvania's approach to establishing and implementing energy policy has been affected by the then political climate, in who's in control, who's responsible for making and implementing policy decisions. Dave has explained to you what is required. We saw the political science, how a bill becomes a law, what occurs, and ultimately the elected political official plays a large role in the evolution of this, and ultimately the governor signing that. Similar to what you see at the national level with regard to the influence of Congress and the president on energy and environmental law and politics at the federal level, who controls the state legislature and the governor's office often plays a significant role in establishing and implementing energy law and policy in Pennsylvania. Picking up kind of where Dave left off with the history from the coal mining days, in January 2014, then Governor Corbett oversaw the issuance of the Pennsylvania State Energy Plan. And this was the first energy master plan that the state of Pennsylvania had produced up until that time. The subtitle of that plan, one of the essential themes of the plan, was energy equals jobs. And consistent with that articulated theme, Governor Corbett stressed that the goal and objective of the plan was to recognize the concept that energy was tied to the Commonwealth's economic viability. And again, that from a planning perspective, that title, the energy plan itself, told you what that was all about. The 2014 State Energy Plan emphasized how Pennsylvania's energy policy was intended to be business friendly, and was intended to help Pennsylvania attract business and jobs related to the energy industry. Although the state energy plan in 2014 made it very clear that the government's role is to protect public health and safety, it coupled that responsibility with the government's role to foster a welcoming atmosphere for job creators and to facilitate business growth and development in the energy industry. In fact, the plan itself contained a quote from Governor Corbett which said, "Government cannot be the competitor to business, it must be the partner. It cannot be the adversary, it must be the advocate." And that's set forth in the 2014 State Energy Master Plan. That plan stressed the fact that Pennsylvania was the home to oil, natural gas, nuclear, hydropower, wind, solar, and various other alternative and renewable energy sources, and that Pennsylvania was a leader in both energy production and resource diversity. So consistent with that concept of diverse energy and the portfolio that the Commonwealth has, and with that background in mind, the plan described a policy of all of the above and below. That was the policy statement within that plan. And what that meant was that all the above approach was meant to make it clear that Pennsylvania's 2014 energy plan and policies were intended to further support and advance all the diverse energy sources that I mentioned, and to provide the tools and the mechanisms for the state government and others to be able to do so. Some of the highlights of the 2000 Pennsylvania State Energy Plan are the following. Again, it was the first master plan. The energy plan had a strong emphasis on jobs and utilizing investment in Pennsylvania's energy sector. And again, energy equals jobs was the subtitle of the plan. The plan articulated a commitment to make Pennsylvania the energy and jobs capital of the nation. The plan also committed to taking advantage of the diverse energy portfolio and promoting free market competition, market-based options to customers, and ultimately furthering that concept. But it also had a goal of maintaining greater energy independence, which obviously is what's occurred. Interestingly enough, and Dave and I have talked, and when I've spoken to Dr. Williamson's students, we've talked about the fact that how the Pennsylvania and the country as a whole has gone from being energy dependent to energy independent in such a great way. Dave and I talked about in the early 1990s when power plants were being powered by coal. And many would say, well, why not natural gas? Well, in the early 1990s, the concept was we're running out of natural gas and it's too expensive. There's not enough. We would love to be able to power these plants by natural gas, but natural gas is in short supply and it's going away. Well, 10 years later, those same developers of power plants and energy sources were then finding suddenly there is natural gas. And even before the Marcellus Shale and other supplies of natural gas became known and technology allowed for it to be developed, suddenly natural gas became a predominant means of supplying energy within Pennsylvania and within the country. And again, without getting into the topic here outside of Pennsylvania, when we get into the concept of liquefied natural gas, one example of that I have talked about is that in the early 2000s, I was involved with permitting a facility off the New Jersey coast, which was intended to bring in from Trinidad liquefied natural gas, which involved making gas so cold that it becomes liquid, and in essence, 600 times of the volume of the gas could be reduced down, and ultimately when it is made warm again, it expands. And tankers would come in and bring this into the country, and ultimately it would be released into the natural gas system within the country. Well, the one facility that I was dealing with never got built for economic reasons and otherwise. Years later, that same facility was being looked at by similar energy companies and developers to become an exporter of liquefied natural gas. That same equipment that would take this liquefied natural gas, LNG, off of a tanker that's specially built for it, warm it up, and then release it as gas, 600 times more gas than the volume of liquid, then suddenly was being proposed to now take that gas, Marcellus Shale or otherwise, and liquefy it and put it on tankers that would go to Northern Europe. So that's an example of how an energy-dependent Pennsylvania and United States has become energy independent in just a very short amount of time. And the Energy Master Plan recognized that, the time frame of as Dave's described it, how Pennsylvania has become independent, and the Energy Master Plan was intended to further that goal and objective. The plan also contained a clear commitment to the development and transport of natural shale gas and increasing the export of that energy resource, and it pointed out the fact that such a commitment will require a significant investment in pipeline infrastructure, which again is part of much of the controversy that we see today related to the transportation systems that are needed to convey this energy product from one point to another. The 2014 Energy Plan also highlighted the legislature's efforts to ensure safe and responsible development of natural gas and talked about more frequent and transparent well production reporting, authorizing the state's PUC to enforce federal pipeline standards, and several other public safety standards and the balancing of property owners' rights and other things. The 2014 plan also stressed the need to aggressively pursue diversifying Pennsylvania's transportation fuel portfolio, and in particular utilizing natural gas and liquefied natural gas and others in vehicles and otherwise, and pointed towards state vehicles becoming powered by natural gas and other alternative energies. The plan also recognized that due to the expected retirement of coal-fired plants, Pennsylvania should expect an increase in the reliance on natural gas-fired facilities. And again, that's what we're seeing here today in a much more frequent basis, natural gas coming into play in Pennsylvania's energy policy. The plan further predicted the need for continued heavy reliance and investment in nuclear energy and urged the federal government to develop long-term nuclear waste storage solutions based upon some of the recommendations that have been made by a Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future. The 2014 Energy Plan also recognized the growth in alternative and renewable energy was driven by decreased cost and requirements of what Dave described as being the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards Act of 2014, which I'll talk about in a little more detail shortly. But what has happened is, as a result of the plan, there's been a continued commitment to energy efficiency, and the plan recommended that we should be fostering economic development in Pennsylvania, and it pointed out that there have been 800 jobs that have been created from 2009 to 2014. The Pennsylvania Energy Master Plan was issued in January of 2014. In November 2014, and at the time Governor Corbett was in office, in November 2014, Tom Wolf defeated the then incumbent Governor Tom Corbett, and Governor Wolf took office in January of 2015. Before I talk about what has happened in Pennsylvania since the issuance of the 2014 Energy Plan and the change in the governor's office, there's a few highlights of the Commonwealth's current energy profile that I should point out. First of all, as we sit here today, Pennsylvania's gross natural gas production, primarily from Marcellus Shale, reached 5.5 trillion cubic feet in 2017. That put Pennsylvania in the category of being the second largest natural gas producer in the country after Texas. Pennsylvania was the third largest coal-producing state in the nation in 2017, and the only state, as you heard, mining anthracite coal, which, as you've heard, has a higher heat value than other types of coal, among other things. In Pennsylvania, 51% of the households use natural gas as their primary home heating fuel. 22% rely on electricity, 17% use fuel oil, 4% use propane, and nearly 3% burn wood. And in addition to that, producing electricity currently accounts for almost half of the natural gas consumed in Pennsylvania. Like many other states, Pennsylvania, with the recommendation and the support of Governor Wolf, has become much more focused on reducing fossil fuel dependence and requiring a continued movement towards alternative and renewable energy sources. But that concept is not something that has just come about. In 2004, the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards Act, as Dave indicated, mandated that 18% of the electricity that is sold in Pennsylvania by 2021 has to come from renewable sources. And at least 0.5% of that has to be from solar power. In 2017, renewable energy accounted for about 4.5% of Pennsylvania's net electricity generation. Now, just to put that in perspective, how Pennsylvania's move and the mandate towards renewable energy compares to other states, let me talk about how that compares to other states and the role of government in determining what energy policy looks like for a state. During his 2 terms as New Jersey governor, Chris Christie strongly resisted many measures that were geared towards advancing alternative renewable energy sources, and particularly those dealing with offshore wind-produced energy. Since taking office in January of this year, the current governor, Phil Murphy, has signed many legislative initiatives to establish new clean energy programs and standards, and he signed an executive order directing the development of an updated New Jersey Energy Master Plan. Now, in comparison to Pennsylvania, that executive order resulted in ongoing hearings right now for this state energy plan in New Jersey, with the targets that 21% of the energy sold in New Jersey must be from renewable energy sources by 2020, 35% of all energy sources in New Jersey by 2025, 50% by 2030, and by 2050, 100% of the energy produced in New Jersey, based upon its master plan, energy master plan, has to be from an alternative renewable source. In essence, by 2050, New Jersey's current governor and the energy master plan that his executive order is advancing says that 100% of the energy in New Jersey has to be from non-fossil fuel sources or alternative and renewable energy sources. Significantly different than Pennsylvania, significantly different than New Jersey just one administration ago. New Jersey's energy policy in New Jersey is, again, as I said, the polar opposite of what Governor Christie's approach was, but it was very similar to the 2014 mandate with much less emphasis on renewable energy than that of the Pennsylvania plan. Pennsylvania's current state energy plan, in addition to Pennsylvania's current state energy plan, there are several more recent developments that should be noted in Pennsylvania. There's the 2015 Climate Change Action Plan update that was released in August of 2016, which updated the original 2009 Climate Change Action Plan, and it stemmed from the Pennsylvania Climate Change Act of 2008. Pennsylvania also has, in July 2018, under the current administration, issued the draft for the Pennsylvania Solar Future Plan, and that would involve even greater emphasis on alternative and renewable energy going forward. The big push that we're seeing with alternative and renewable energy, and particularly solar energy, is the use of tax exemptions and other incentives that would encourage solar deployment and to assist solar projects in finding sponsors with tax equity. Pennsylvania's objective of trying to provide meaningful economic incentives, as their most recent plans indicate, is very similar to what other states are dealing with when dealing with solar renewable energy credits, or what are known as SRECs. These are intended to encourage qualifying in-state solar facilities to be developed by giving economic incentives. And an SREC, in essence, is an economic incentive that would provide the ability to make that project economically more feasible. Pennsylvania electric utilities, as a result of the mandates that we've talked about, are now required to provide a specific percentage of their electricity from renewable energy sources. To meet those requirements, the electricity utilities have to demonstrate that they're either producing that electricity themselves from these alternative sources, or that they are paying to get credit for that someone else who's producing that solar energy. The purchase of renewable energy certificates serve as proof that the utility has paid for that energy being produced, thereby reducing the amount of electricity that they are producing by non-solar sources. So in Pennsylvania, an SREC is issued for every megawatt hour generated by a solar facility. An SREC is bought and sold typically by someone that needs the credit and from someone who produces the credit. The Pennsylvania Act 40 of 2017 attempted to make that a better market. What was happening in Pennsylvania was this mechanism, this incentive, was being diluted because SRECs could be purchased from out-of-state developers of solar energy. And as a result, the market, the demand was diluted. Utilities that had to buy SRECs as part of their mandate could buy them from New Jersey or from Delaware or other states where solar credits were being produced and get credit for them. And as a result of that, the motivation and the incentive to be able to build solar facilities was not being assisted by getting the economic relief or money coming in to make the economics of the solar project better for the solar developer. Pennsylvania Act 40 of 2017 mandated that SRECs that are purchased by Pennsylvania utilities have to be purchased from Pennsylvania-produced solar facilities. So as a result, the encouragement of having individuals and companies provide solar facilities, whether it be a household facility or whether it be commercial operations, and having that electricity that gets into the electric grid offsets and reduces the amount of electricity that is being created by other sources that are not alternative or renewable or solar sources. That is one of the incentives that's come into play here. One of the changes made by Act 40 was to limit and direct utilities to only purchase those SRECs, but also to require that utilities have to meet enhanced standards as to when they are producing energy by solar sources or other non-fossil fuel sources. Similar to when Governor Corbett touted the economic benefits of all of the above energy policy from the 2014 State Energy Plan, Governor Wolf has indicated that Act 40, in his view, is making sure that the benefits of the increased renewable jobs, a cleaner environment, and a growing renewable economy will be felt in the Commonwealth. So although there's been recently a great movement in the direction of advancing alternative and renewable energy sources in Pennsylvania, it's important to remember that Pennsylvania is still very much dependent upon traditional energy sources. It's also significant to note that concerns voiced by environmental protection advocates related to the environmental and ecological impact of the various types of energy production, storage, transportation, and other aspects have not gone unnoticed over the years. Since the coal mining days that Dave Argyll has talked about, federal and state environmental and regulatory standards and permitting and approval requirements have become much more advanced, much more restrictive and protective. As technology gets better, the standards that producers of electricity, producers of energy are held to are going to become higher. Air quality, water quality, ecological and environmental impact, those standards are increased on a regular basis and it continue to be increased, requiring that producers of energy have to use such parts of their operation as best available control technology, best management practices, and basically indicating that they're using the state-of-the-art technology to be able to achieve the best quality of output and less impact resulting from their facilities. So with all that being said, as Senator Argyll has pointed out to you, Pennsylvania energy policies continue to be driven in large part by local and economic needs. Jobs, 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 and what is considered to be the best way to advance the economic well-being of the citizens of Pennsylvania continue to be the driving force behind the focus of energy policy formation and implementation, but there has to be a balancing. And where the concerns of the residents in a given area within the state, for example, not wanting to have energy-related facilities such as pipelines or power plants in their neighborhood are the driving force, then that area of the state is going to be focusing more so on greater limitations, controls, and limiting the nature and extent of these facilities and not in my backyard. So this balancing of people that are supporting the local economy, the coal industry, the nuclear industry, the Marcellus Shale area, where the economic benefits and the drive of new jobs coming from energy sources is a strong factor in advancing what legislators and others are going to support in that area. Equally, there are others that are concerned about the impact on their area, or simply because of that's their desire and their approach in wanting to limit impact from these types of facilities that go beyond what they believe alternative and renewable energy sources would better provide. In all these situations, the advancements of the local goals and objectives have to be balanced with a desire to achieve economic and other benefits with the need to address the public health, safety, and welfare concerns and environmental protection. Overall, these considerations help to shape the energy choices that the citizens of Pennsylvania are currently making and will continue to be making in the future. As technology continues to improve, many of the concerns that are voiced by those who object to the types of energy production that's being made should be addressed. Air quality, water quality, impact on wetlands, all the various areas of concern that are articulated by various groups that oppose this are being addressed as technology gets better. Obviously, as we go to renewable energy sources as well and eliminate any impact from fossil fuels, then it's even being addressed in a greater manner. But there's always going to be the lack of trusting the other side concept that has to be dealt with. It often runs very deep for people on both sides, and as Dave has indicated, there's got to be a balancing of these factors, and there's got to be a cooperative effort among all sides to help solve this problem. This is not, as Dave has indicated, a problem that is going to be easy to reconcile because there are many conflicting interests and because time is needed to be able to get to a further point to make this all happen. So I guess in conclusion, I'd like to say that it will take a continued effort of not only this generation, but also the next generation that Dave has indicated as far as college students and others who are going to be down the line, the chemists, the mathematicians, and everyone else. But it will take an effort, and it's not going to be happening overnight. I would like to thank Dr. Williamson for inviting Dave and I to share this time together with you. And I hope that the efforts of the Lycoming Center for Energy in the future are continuing to address some of these issues we're talking about here today and can help to provide for better education of everybody in the area. Thank you very much.
Thanks to both of you for all of that wonderful, great information. To continue the conversation, as I told both Dave and Bob before they came this evening, and as many of you who have attended these events before know, one of my goals is to have each of our speakers engage with our ongoing conversation about what our energy futures look like as a state, a nation, a globe, and how do we get there? And so we've made it part of the tradition of our speaker series then to take some common questions that I'll start with to ask each of them, some that I've created and some that our prior speakers have created, including Senator Yaw, who's here, to pass along and get you to respond to. And then finish this short segment with to ask you what questions we should ask of the next speakers so that we can bring people together, not just in the space, not just online when we post the video of this down the road, but that we can have speakers essentially talking to each other across time and space. So the place that I'd like you to build on what you've said is building on the idea of where you stand it depends on where you sit and where we've come from in recent years in terms of our energy policies and our energy mix, is to think 38 years into the future, since that was a number that you used earlier from your time at Lycoming, in which people like Zach and Caleb and others in the room will be in positions like yours. What's our energy mix going to look like then, do you think? And maybe more importantly than that basic question is, what are the challenges that we must overcome to get there? What don't we know now about that we'll need to figure out by the time we get there? And if you're wrong about what our energy mix will be, what will be the consequences?
I told the chemistry class today that it's a lot easier to look backwards and try to interpret what's happened than it is to look forward and make predictions. But I think a lot of it is going to depend on technology. You know, when I think of what's happened in the Marcellus Shale, you know, none of that would have happened without the technology that made it possible. And no one was talking about that when I was spending my time here as a student. And so the technology then, of course, leads to the economics. If the price of this resource is higher than the price of this resource, then of course the market is going to drive us toward X instead of Y. And I'm not sure that there's a person on the planet who could really be 100% accurate in making a prediction like that. And if you find someone, you probably want to invest in that and make a lot of money on the stock market.
Sure, absolutely. Bob?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think as I was trying to indicate, technology has been a driving force to get us to where we are today. Just the concept of having natural gas in the volume that we have now, no one could ever, even in the 90s, have imagined. In addition to that, the technology that produces this energy as it gets better, it should address the concerns that are being voiced as far as impact is concerned. But the biggest issue that I think we don't know about is what else is out there. Other than cold fusion, which is a concept that could potentially be the be-all and end-all, having nuclear-type energy being produced without the impact of radiation and waste and things like that, the unknowns out there as to what may be coming down the line that could make all this a much better situation than today. But I think what's happening from my perspective, regulations, it's important to realize that at the federal level and the state level, regulations continue to keep in check this growth and to make sure that the impact of these energy sources are being addressed. The impacts are being addressed in an appropriate manner. And as that technology gets better, as the energy is cleaner and cleaner, presumably there's going to be greater ability to produce that energy, whether it's alternative and renewable energy or whether it's somehow magically dealing with fossil fuels and others to make it better. Time has been our friend when it comes to improving the situations. Time has also been our friend when it comes to cleaning up old sites that we thought never would have been cleaned up before. And even in that situation, it's technology and the ability to be able to remediate groundwater, to be able to deal with soil contamination at much better levels than anyone would have thought in the past you could do so, and making brownfield sites or blighted sites into areas today that can be developed and redeveloped into something that's very worthwhile and beneficial. So if that trend continues the way it's been going, then hopefully these are issues that are not going to be problems we're going to be talking about in the future.
Thank you for those answers. But your answers then bring up a particular question that was asked by the last speaker we had last spring, who is Richard Hansen, Executive Director of the Energy Access Foundation, focused on solar energy for 30 years, is his background. And the thing he wanted to ask, not knowing who was next, that I think really ties into what you just said, is, you know, we hear lots about climate change and global warming, and his concern specifically is, do you think we can pull off the transition to low carbon emissions and a sustainable energy future in time? In his case, he phrased it in time to protect our great-grandchildren from the severe effects of climate change. And so it seemed like an appropriate time to ask that question, because I think your argument is, we have made amazing strides in the technology to fix some of the problems that were created in the past. I think he, not knowing who you were, challenged you to say, will it be enough soon enough?
Well, I guess a couple points. Clearly, you look at what New Jersey is doing, for an example, where they have targeted 2050 as a date when 100% of the energy being produced is by renewable sources. The question is that realistic? Is that possible? One of the major problems that has occurred with respect to the use of alternative energy to power the grid, to power our life, our day-to-day living, has been that it is expensive and it is a very low output as far as, you know, dollars being put in and energy getting out. So that technology has to improve drastically beyond what we're looking at today. An interesting point that I was given by someone who presumably is in the know, a high governmental official, who has said that a lot of the concerns that people have about fossil fuel, natural gas in particular, output, were generated by supporters of nuclear power, who thought that if you could muddy the waters enough with the fossil fuel impact in everyone's mind, that everyone would turn to nuclear. And that was a way of setting the tone for that. What happened, though, instead, according to this person, you could buy this theory, you can't, instead of people turning to nuclear as a solution, they turned to alternative renewable energy. And that is a solution that today is not a solution in and of itself because of the reasons I indicated. So believe that or not, you know, nuclear is out there as an option that can produce limitless amounts of energy if that commitment is made to do it. and if those who are concerned about the impact of nuclear facilities, nuclear waste in particular, have their concerns addressed, and that may never happen.
I think with Senator Argall's colleague in the audience that he didn't know when he asked this question that he was asking of this of you. So I'll take this turn and I'm paraphrasing in this instance. He had talked about the advantages of natural gas as an available, reliable, and affordable source of energy for this foreseeable future. And had, I think, agreed with you in anticipation of your comments, Bob, about the economic viability and scalability of existing technologies for renewables at least. And so his question was, given all of that, how could one oppose natural gas being part of the mix?
Yeah.
At least for the foreseeable future.
No, and facts are facts. I mean, when I was a very young state representative, every time the Department of General Services, under law, would want to make a conversion from coal to gas at a state university or a prison or some kind of a state office, they had to come in and justify it because we had a law, we still have the law on the books, you know, coal first, Pennsylvania coal first. And the coal folks were very upset that they were losing market share to natural gas. With the price of gas as low as it has become because of these amazing quantities, that some of that supply and demand stuff that I learned in economics class, damn, it's true. And so my point is the coal guys don't complain anymore because they can't argue with the numbers. Now, they don't like losing the coal boiler at Kutztown University, but they don't argue anymore because of the math is very simple.
I have two more questions and then I want to open it up to the audience. The first of the two questions is really specifically for the benefit of our students. Obviously, Lycoming College, a liberal arts college that you're both very well familiar with. What should our students within this liberal arts environment be doing right now to better prepare themselves to engage in the world of energy, either as citizens of that world or as others looking to prepare for careers somehow connected to energy?
The best advice I got from Fred Grogan and Mike Roskin was to go out and find myself an internship, and that turned into another internship, which turned into a job that I very much love, and so that would probably be the best place to start. I think about all the jobs we lost in coal mining over the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, all the way through. All those jobs have been made up and more now in natural gas here in Pennsylvania just in the last 15 years. And so I would think that the opportunities will continue to present themselves here.
Well, beyond that, in the energy field as a student, the types of courses you take and what you focus on can be very broad in what you're doing, because what's happening in the energy industry is that you're going to be dealing with the economic components of it, you're dealing with the regulatory components of it, you're dealing with the scientific components of it, you're dealing with the legal components of it. So you can be a political science major, you can be a science major, you can be a chemical major, you could be a government-focused political science major and still find areas in the energy world where there's going to be jobs and opportunities. And this is something that is not going away. One of the things that I've always observed, and I do a lot of real estate development related work, and over time as the economy shifts and different, 2008 with the recession and economic conditions get worse, one of the things that is always a constant is the need for energy and utilities. And it's always going to be there. From a career opportunity standpoint, it always will be there. And there's always going to be the need to further different aspects of that. And young college students can can start focusing on that in a very early time and find a career in those industries.
Last, for me anyway, without being able to announce necessarily who our next speaker is going to be, what should I ask them?
Well, one of the things that I think that's important that we're getting from this, I think it was a very good question that Senator Yall had asked, why not natural gas? The real key is, at what point do the advocates of environmental protection get satisfied that the energy policies that are in place are going to address their concerns and needs? Okay. At all times, as I said, from a regulatory standpoint, there's always a focus on addressing environmental and ecological concerns when you're dealing with siting of facilities and technology improving. When, as I said before, we dealt with coal-fired power plants back in the early 90s, environmental groups were very, very high on saying, boy, if you make this natural gas, we won't have a problem with it anymore. Well, now all these facilities are natural gas, and there's a great abundance of natural gas. And so now the concern still is it's a fossil fuel, and there's impacts from that occurring. So at some point, for this all to come together in a consistent way, there's got to be a medium where people can be satisfied that their concerns about the environment are being addressed or not addressed. And I think that's really that balance that we talked about ultimately is, will we reach that point? Can we reach that point? And how do we get to that point?
I think a pragmatic approach to the answer would be, give me one good idea on energy that can get 102 votes in the House, 26 votes in the Senate, and signature of the governor.
As soon as I get that answer, I'll forward it your way.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, we get ideas all the time, but this group hates it or this group hates it, and so those are the ideas that really we need to hear from, because most of us we're not experts on everything. We learn a little bit about a lot of things, and so the ideas that we get from the people that we represent, that's our job then, to try to get them to the governor's desk.
In the time that we have left then, what I want to do is, I think the guys in the back have a microphone for me, open it up for questions from the audience. As I've told audiences of times past, I encourage the students to ask questions, and in part of my encouraging of the students to ask their questions, it's my eyesight, I'm getting older, I end up seeing students before I see other hands in the air. And so that puts some pressure on them, but it's also good for them. So let me open it up.
With one of the major concerns being jobs and job security, probably from your constituents, how do you balance in PA, where those jobs are usually answered by coal or natural gas, how do you balance that with the foreseeing ocean rise and 40% of the coastal population being pushed inland, and my generation and the generations to come having harder times finding jobs because now we have displaced so many people?
Is to look at the facts. I've never believed that we have to have either jobs or environmental protection. I think we have to do both. And in Schuylkill County, we learned the hard way when we had no protection. And I told the chemistry class, I understand, 1943, we're fighting the Nazis. The policy seemed to be get the coal out of the ground, make the steel, win the war, and we'll deal with the environment later, okay? And unfortunately, that left us with billions and billions of dollars of damages. But no, I think it's fair to say we need to look at both.
I agree.
Hi, so this is kind of a long question, so bear with me. So over the summer, I worked at a natural gas power plant. I had an internship there. And for the sake of that natural gas power plant, I won't say which one it is. But you said that regulation is needed and it's necessary, and that bill in particular that was established in 2014, it ensured the compliance of all sorts of regulations and things like that. I've seen something different. So this power plant, they didn't have a compliance manager until recently. And that compliance manager had a huge task of collecting all of the data of emissions and stuff from years past because they didn't have a compliance manager. And it just seemed really odd because, of course, you have like NERC compliance workers that come in and check and make sure everything's okay. But the DOE and EPA, they didn't necessarily audit them on a yearly basis to make sure that was upkept. So now the compliance officer has a huge task of looking at 3 years worth of data and trying to, show the EPA, DOE that they were in compliance. It just seems that this was a new power plant, and this power plant has contracts with over 100 businesses locally, that because it was such a boon to the economy, that regulatory stuff was kind of overlooked. So it just seems odd that, yes, it's a huge power plant, yes, it employs a lot, but I just didn't see much degree of compliance issues that were raised. And there were a lot of questions that I saw while working inside that power plant, and it's just contrary to what I've seen. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on that. It just seemed like the natural gas industry kind of...
Comment on that. I deal with many companies that are involved with energy production and natural gas energy production. When you're dealing with regulations, there's different components. There's the regulations themselves, what do they require? There's the compliance with the regulations by those who are being regulated, and then there's the enforcement of the regulations by the regulators. And if there's a break in that chink, in that chain, then there's going to be a problem. What happens is, in most cases, someone is not complying, they're not setting up the protocol, they're not addressing the requirements of the permits that tell them they have to be dealing with the record keeping, the reporting, meeting these standards consistently, then they're going to be hit with violations and citations and shut down. Now, maybe whoever you work for got away with it, but again, from an enforcement standpoint, there's got to be enforcement, and ultimately, it's very costly for someone who's producing electric energy from a gas-fired plant to be shut down because they are not in conformance or compliance. So it's spitting penny wise and pound foolish. Someone should be responsible for that. Someone is not complying with what they should have been doing, whether it's from the past or now. It sounds like they're trying to get in compliance now. That still may be a problem. You've got to deal with that issue going forward. So I think really to answer your question, I don't think anyone is getting away with it. It may be happening, but the agencies that I deal with are out there. They're every time a new standard comes up from an air permitting standpoint, for example, that next permittee is being looked at to comply with that more severe standard. And the threshold keeps getting higher and higher. And it's not only getting the permit to comply, but also demonstrate you're complying and being mindful of the fact that if you don't, then there are penalties, including shutting your operation down and not allowing you to operate anymore.
I wonder too, and this is far beyond my level of expertise, but in today's world, I suspect a lot of power plants like that are reporting data continuously online, and so the inspector wouldn't ever have to leave his or her office in Harrisburg to look at a screen and say, well, here's the emissions from XYZ plant. And so just because you don't see, someone walking around the plant with a clipboard doesn't mean there isn't somebody watching.
And I think we'll probably have time for 2 more questions, so I'll give it to Ali here.
So my question is more for how do you reconcile the fact that most economically disadvantaged rural Pennsylvanians sometimes sacrifice their long-term property equity in their homes to get these natural gas wells on their property, and how that looks going forward for these populations, because they'll be seeing the effects of natural gas on their own property?
Same was true in Schuylkill County. My grandfather drove truck for the one local coal company, and I've seen his death certificate, and it was at least partly attributed to black lung. Well, he needed a job, he had 4 daughters, and so that he probably didn't understand what he was breathing all the time. And let me go back to my earlier question. I think we need to do both. I think we need to do whatever we can for economic development, that every town hall meeting that I hold in my district, from McAdoo all the way to Wilmelsdorf, jobs is a critical issue. But environmental protection, I think, needs to be treated equally. You've seen on my pictures what happens when we make mistakes. I think that the natural gas industry has learned from a lot of the mistakes of the past. But no, I think we need to focus on both. I really do.
Oh, okay. Let me get one more, and then I'll let you finish up with your comment.
Thank you. The Act 213 Alternative Energy Portfolio proposes a goal of 18% of the electricity produced or sold by 2020 should be from alternative, non-polluting sources, right? And we're now at 4.5%. That's a huge gap between now and 2 years away. And the goal proposed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change suggests that we only have 12 years to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 45%. How are we going to achieve these goals?
I thought the same when Secretary Seif talked to me about being closer, to 1776, to the end of our, orange water problem in Schuylkill County. We have made very, I think, concrete progress. I've seen it in my own lifetime. But yeah, as far as how that pace will continue, it's not just up to government regulators. These things, we're really dependent on technology and the free market.
We'll give the last word to Senator Yaw.
Just several comments. Number one, it's my understanding, and I may have the numbers wrong, I think that our emissions in the United States are really gone down. They're lower than they have been for many, many years. And especially in New York City, I think that the numbers that they use is the emissions, since they switched over to natural gas, are down about 30-some%. At least that raised another question of how to get gas there. But one of the things that I've learned in this whole energy thing, and I chair the Senate Environmental Resources and Energy Committee, is that Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania is a leader in the world. And I'm not sure that Pennsylvania is ready for that. There are many, many factors that happen throughout the world that affect what happens in Pennsylvania. And for all of you who may be political science majors, the geopolitical use of energy is amazing. And if you think that it won't be used as a weapon, or as part of the political process, I think it's pretty clear that that happens. I had a hearing in Harrisburg about the foreign money and its influence on the gas industry, and it's pretty clear that there's foreign money being utilized in opposition to the gas industry in Pennsylvania. Because if you just think about it, what happens in Pennsylvania is a world leader. And what is good for Pennsylvania gas industry is probably bad for Russia. And it's amazing. And I've really had the opportunity through an association with some branches of Penn State to be able to speak to people from all over the world that have come here and said, you know, how do you operate with the gas industry in Pennsylvania? We would prefer to deal with the United States rather than Russia. So there's this, if you want to comment about it, I think the whole geopolitical energy issue is something that it affects everything that we do. It's just like what I think recently somebody increased production so that it floods the market with oil. And that's going to keep us hooked on low-cost oil and gasoline. Those are all things that are out there. So anybody that's a political science major, there is fertile ground out there for a lot of work in the future, I'm sure.
Text that I cited from the Almanac of American Politics talked about the fact that, you know, we were an international leader in energy. We fell on hard times, and we're back. Now, it's a very different kind of energy than it was in 1900. You know, the smokestacks run a lot cleaner today than they did then. Yeah, it's been curious to see that circle. And what do you think, John? Our history professors would probably have something to say about that, right?
I, for one, am thrilled that Pennsylvania's coal history is practically dead,
Yeah.
perhaps in Western PA. And I'm thrilled with the gas industry picking up the slack. There is a tremendous improvement in Pennsylvania coal position.
And you don't hear that often because, you know, think about it, it's just human nature. We tend to focus on the negative more than the positive. And, you know, with good news, and I've had this discussion with TV news producers and, you know, publishers of newspapers, you know, there's something really good happening. Why isn't that on page one? And they'll be honest and say, because our viewers and our readers are much more interested in the bad news. And that's just the world that we live in.
Well, and with that cheery note, I think we should end for the evening. First, let me ask you to join me in thanking our guests for being here this evening. And let me then encourage you not to think of this as an end of the conversation that you have with those around you about energy. The challenges of providing affordable, sustainable, and reliable sources of energy for all across the world are, as I think Bob said, not going away. They are going to be one of the big questions that we face for many years to come, and having civil discourse about those challenges and how best to come together to try to tackle them are a part of what we should all be engaged with and really a part of the mission of the Center for Energy in the Future. So thank all of you for participating in that conversation as well, and have a good evening.